Hello, everyone. I'm Chuang. Let's draw the forelimb of Microraptor today. The Microraptor's forelimbs were basically wings, very similar to those of today's birds. Like modern birds, its inside bones were shaped like this, not fully stretched, which is common knowledge anatomically and biologically. When drawing, we first should understand its internal skeleton. Its arms were bent like this. But when alive, as there was a layer of membrane connecting from the wrist to the shoulder, the surface looked straight and smooth. Like birds, the ratio between the entire wing and the bone, that is, the bone accounted for a very minor part of the entire wing. If its wings were this long, the bones would probably only take up less than half of it. We should keep this in mind during the later drawing. In addition, scientists have studied Microraptor's wings very carefully, so we know well about the exact distribution and the approximate number of their feathers. When drawing, we have to pay attention to these. Now, we draw its one forelimb. First, we determine the position of the bones. We draw the bones of its forelimbs about this size. Like a human arm, its forelimb bones consisted of 3 parts with almost equal length. That is, the upper arm, the forearm, and the hand. The upper arm was the humerus, which was probably in this position. The forearm, which was made up of the ulna and radius, was about this section, and the rest was the hand. We just need to locate these 3 points and know its internal structure. When drawing the entire forelimbs, we don't need to show it. Then we draw the hand part. We should know that there were 3 fingers on each hand, and show them with dotted lines temporally. The first finger linked all the way to its wrist, and grew out from the wrist like this. The second and third fingers were on the palm, which were probably here. The second finger was this long. We use a dotted line to show it, because we have to cover it at the end. The third finger was here and would be completely covered by the feather. Next, we draw its feathers. Microraptor's flight feathers, which constituted its wings and played a role in flight, started from the entire forearm, which was equivalent to the human elbow, to the fingertip of the second finger. This set of feathers on its wings was divided into 2 parts. One was the primaries, which grew on the palm, the other was the secondaries. There were about 12 primaries. We should draw them as accurately as possible. Let's start with the primaries. This first feather was at the tip of the finger, and grew along and parallel to the direction of the finger. The first feather was relatively short and the second feather became very long. The following 10 primaries, as a whole, grew to its wrist. Probably within this range. And one was shorter than the other. The last few feathers all pointed in this direction. Next in this range were its secondaries. There were about 12 to 13 secondaries, generally more than 13, but the exact number is unknown, because the fossils found are incomplete, so we assume there are 13 feathers during the drawing. This was the shape of the secondaries. The secondaries and primaries made up the 2 parts of the wing feathers, and modern birds also have their flight feathers like this. The ends of the secondaries pointed to the elbows. This was the forearm. And the front ends went around like this. We don't need to draw the gaps between the individual feathers now, because we'll draw the covered feathers later. The coverts were relatively random. As their fossils were preserved incompletely, we normally take reference to those of modern birds, but with more quantity. The coverts were generally composed of 3 to 4 layers, and some people think that there might be 5 layers, but it is hard to tell from the current fossils. When drawing the coverts, we can start here. Since we are not sure of its numbers, we don't need to draw them very clearly. We just outline their wavy shapes. The rest layers would become blurry as going upward. Since the feathers here were so small and they blended in better with each other, it's not necessary to draw them as clearly as the ones below. Next, we draw the front end of the wing. We know that its arms were bent like this inside, but when alive, it was connected to a layer of membrane, which was covered with a layer of feathers. These feathers covered the entire palm. So we can draw it a streamlined shape, which formed the front end of the wing. And we can still draw some feathers on it. Its fingers were wrapped inside. We draw the exposed part of its fingers. This first finger had its nail exposed. The second finger also had its nail exposed, and the third finger was completely covered. Next, we draw the overlapping parts of its very long flight feathers. Birds and Microraptor have very similar feather structures. The feathers at the back were on top of the feathers in the front, and that's what we are going to draw. If viewed from the dorsal side, the inner feathers were on top of the outer feathers, and we should pay attention to their overlapping relationship. Then, we draw its rachises. When drawing them, we should note that the parts on the sides of the rachises were asymmetrical at the beginning. The rachis was close to the outside of the feather, not in the middle. The primaries were all like this. Then we come to the secondaries. Their rachises gradually became bilaterally symmetrical. At the rear end of the secondaries, we can draw a few smaller feathers that extended upward. Next, we add some details. We draw the rachis of its first flight feather. Add some overlapping textures on the covered feathers, but not too many. We can add more lines at the edge of this side. Draw some feather traces on the front of the arm. Then we simply show the outline of its torso. Good, like this, we've finished drawing this forelimb of Microraptor.